Before the name, before the quest, there was only the stone and the sky. For 1,000 centuries, the stone sat atop the highest peak of the flower-fruit mountain, drinking the essence of the sun and the moon, breathing the winds of the 4 seas. It was a thing of perfect stillness, a vessel of accumulated time. Then came the day when the 9 celestial spheres aligned, and a beam of pure white starlight struck its core. The air, thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, grew taut with a soundless hum. A hairline fracture appeared, then another, spreading like lightning trapped in rock. With a crack that echoed not in the air but in the very spirit of the mountain, the stone burst open. There was no blood, no birth cry. Only a blinding light that resolved into a form, a monkey fully grown, with fur the color of autumn gold and eyes that burned with the ferocity of captured stars. He knew nothing of fate, destiny, or purpose. His first sensation was the wind, a wild and glorious thing that whipped through his fur, carrying the taste of salt from the distant sea and the sweetness of ripe peaches from the groves below. He stretched his limbs, feeling a power thrumming within them, a chaotic energy that demanded release. He leaped, and the world fell away beneath him. He landed on a branch that should have snapped but instead bowed, cradling him. He laughed, a raw, barking sound that sent a flutter of startled birds into the sky. This was freedom. It was the air in his lungs, the strength in his muscles, the boundless horizon in his star-bright eyes. It was not a concept to be understood. It was a reality to be lived, moment by glorious moment. For days he was a whirlwind of instinct. He feasted on sun-warmed fruit, the juices running down his chin. He drank from mountain streams so clear they reflected the heavens without a flaw. He wrestled with macaques and chattered with gibbons, learning their ways not through instruction, but through imitation and dominance. He was stronger, faster, and fiercer than any of them. They bowed to his untamed spirit, anointing him their king. He accepted the title as he accepted the rain and the sun, as a simple fact of his existence. He was the stone-born king, and the mountain was his kingdom. A domain governed by no law but his own will. One afternoon, while exploring the base of his birthstone, his fingers brushed against something cool and metallic half buried in the soil. He dug it out. It was a circlet of burnished gold, exquisitely crafted yet unadorned. It felt ancient, heavy with a power that was utterly alien to the wild magic of the mountain. As he held it, a low thrum vibrated through his hand, up his arm and into his skull. It was not a sound, but a feeling, a resonance that whispered of order, of paths preordained, of a cage whose bars were invisible. He felt a flicker of something he had never known before, apprehension. The scent of ozone, faint and sterile, clung to the metal, overriding the familiar perfume of the wild. He tossed the circlet aside, the metallic clink against rock, a discordant note in the mountain's symphony. But even as he walked away, he could feel its silent, patient pull, a single unblinking eye watching him from the grass, waiting. The wind suddenly felt less free, the sky a little lower. For the first time, he sensed that his world, vast as it was, had a boundary. His untamed energy was a beacon. It rippled through the spiritual fabric of the world, a wild shout in a silent library, and it did not go unnoticed. One day, a figure appeared at the edge of the monkey kingdom. He was an old man with a long white beard and robes the color of twilight, leaning on a gnarled wooden staff. He moved with a stillness that contrasted sharply with the Monkey King's explosive vitality. This was the sage Master Tien, a keeper of celestial lore and a reader of cosmic threads. He had felt the crack of the stone across 100 miles, a disruption in the great pattern he was sworn to observe. The Monkey King confronted him not with words, but with a baring of teeth and a low growl. The sage did not flinch. His eyes, deep and weary, held no fear, only a profound, almost mournful curiosity. "You are the one," Master Tien said, his voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "The Stoneborn. The prophecy awakens with you." The Monkey King did not understand the words, but he felt their weight. They were chains spoken into existence. He leaped at the sage, a blur of golden fur and righteous fury, only to find himself passing through the space where the man had been. He reappeared a few feet away, unmoved. For weeks a strange tutelage began. Master Tien did not try to capture him, but to contain him. He taught the Monkey King language, not with scrolls, but by naming the world around them: tree, river, sky, moon. With each name, a piece of the world's raw magic felt tamed, catalogued. The Monkey King resisted, but his intelligence was as boundless as his strength. The concepts took root. The sage gave him a name, Sun Wukong, sun for his fiery nature. Wukong for the truth he must awaken to, the emptiness at the heart of all things. Wukong hated the name. It felt like a collar. One evening, as mist coiled around the peaks, Master Tian finally showed him the source of his knowledge, an ancient, star-flecked scroll. On it was a celestial diagram, and at its center, an image of a monkey born from a cracked stone. It was written long before the stone gathered its first drop of dew, the sage explained. The mortal realm has fallen out of balance. The Emperor's mandate of heaven wavers, and corruption seeps from the netherworld. A champion of primordial power is needed to restore order. That is your purpose. He pointed a thin finger. That circlet you found. It is the fulcrum, the key to unlocking your true potential, and the seal of your allegiance to the celestial court. It is your destiny. Wukong stared at the scroll. The lines and symbols meant little, but the image was a perfect reflection of his birth. The feeling of the cage returned, stronger this time, its bars forged from prophecy and ink. My purpose? Wukong spoke, his new voice raw and powerful. My purpose is the taste of a ripe peach, the feel of the wind at the top of the highest tree. He spat on the ground. This is not a purpose. It is a leash. Master Tian sighed, a sound of ancient resignation. A river's purpose is to reach the sea. A star's purpose is to burn. They do not choose it. To understand the cage, you must first see its walls. Go to the Imperial City. There you will find the heart of the imbalance you were born to correct. There you will see what happens when the pattern is broken. The Imperial City was an assault on the senses. Unlike the clean, wild scents of the mountain, the air here was a thick stew of sandalwood incense, spiced meats, sweat, and the cloying perfume of court officials. The sounds were not of wind and chattering monkeys, but of a million shuffling feet, the murmur of countless schemes, and the distant rhythmic clang of a watchman's gong. Towers of lacquered wood and jade tile clawed at the sky, blocking the sun. For Wukong, it was like being plunged to the bottom of the ocean. The pressure was immense, the light dim, the air unbreathable. Every part of him screamed to leap, to climb, to break free, but the endless, straight lines of the city's architecture offered no purchase, only confinement. He was brought before the Emperor, a man who seemed more a collection of silk robes and jade ornaments than a person. But the true power in the room resided in a man standing beside the throne, Minister Cao, the Grand Scribe. Cao was a man whose smile never reached his eyes. His voice was as smooth and cool as polished riverstone. He saw Wukong not as a living being, but as a divine weapon delivered by prophecy. "A auspicious marvel," Cao declared, his voice echoing in the cavernous throne room. "The stone-born champion has come to reaffirm the Emperor's mandate." Wukong felt the eyes of the court upon him, 1,000 pinpricks of fear, ambition, and contempt. They were judging his posture, his fur, his very existence against their rigid codes. It was here he met her. Standing guard near the throne was a woman in simple grey armor, her hand resting on the hilt of a longsword. Her name was Lin, captain of the Imperial Guard. Unlike the others, her gaze was not veiled. It was direct, sharp, and utterly unimpressed. She saw his coiled energy, his barely suppressed wildness, and judged it a threat to the order she was sworn to uphold. Her life was defined by an oath, her movements by years of disciplined practice. She was a fortress of will. He was a force of nature. They were antithetical. Cao attempted to bind Wukong with words of glory and duty. "Your power will quell the rebellions in the south, pacify the river spirits of the west," the minister purred, gesturing to a vast map. "Your name will be sung for 10,000 years." Wukong felt the gilded bars of this new cage closing in. This was not freedom. It was service to a system he did not comprehend and did not respect. One evening in a moonlit courtyard, Lin confronted him. "You do not belong here," she stated, her voice as crisp as snapping ice. "Your chaos will undo everything we strive to maintain." Wukong bared his teeth. "You call this order? I call it a tomb." He lunged, not to harm, but to test her. Their clash was not of steel, but of philosophies. He was a whirlwind of unpredictable motion. She was a bastion of precise economical blocks and parries. Her sword was an extension of her will, a line of cold steel against his untamed energy. Neither could gain an advantage. They stood apart, breathing heavily in the cold night air, an impasse of instinct and discipline. The test of Cao's new weapon came soon. A report arrived, carried by a winded messenger. The Cloud Sea Peaks, a sacred place where floating mountains were tended by gentle spirit weavers, were suffering from a strange blight. The mists were turning sour, the rocks crumbling. It was a clear sign of the cosmic imbalance. "Go," Minister Cao commanded Wukong, a gleam in his eye. "Show the heavens their champion has arrived. Perform your duty." Lin was dispatched to assist him, though Wukong knew her true purpose was to contain him. As he left the suffocating city behind, Wukong felt a sliver of relief, but it was tainted. He was not flying towards freedom. He was being aimed, a living arrow shot from the bow of prophecy. The Cloud Sea Peaks were a world painted in shades of gray, green, and white. Mountains floated like immense islands in an ocean of perpetual mist, connected by bridges of woven light. The air hummed with a quiet, ancient magic, but beneath it, Wukong could feel a discordant thrum. The blight. It was not a visible disease, but a corruption of essence. The vibrant green of the moss was dulling to a sickly gray, and the air carried a faint, bitter scent like soured stone. The spirit weavers, small, luminous beings of condensed mist, flickered weakly, their gentle chimes replaced by a sorrowful hum. As Wukong ventured deeper, leaping from one floating island to the next, he felt a strange pull, a resonance deep within his own stone-born bones. It led him to the core of the largest peak, a vast, geode-like cavern, where colossal jade crystals pulsed with a soft inner light. Here the blight was strongest, black veins creeping across the luminous green surfaces. Lin followed, her movement silent and cautious, her hand never far from her sword. She saw a problem to be solved through force. Wukong felt a pain to be understood. He placed a hand on the central crystal, the jade heart of the mountain. The cold surface seemed to warm beneath his touch. A consciousness vast and slow and utterly non-human flooded his mind. It was not made of words or images, but of pure sensation. The pressure of millennia, the memory of water seeping through cracks, the slow, patient dreaming of rock. This was the spirit of the mountain, a being he would come to know as Jade. She was the collective awareness of all stone in this place, and she was dying. Jade showed him the truth of his own nature. She revealed that all things born of stone, from the smallest pebble to a being like him, were connected to a great stillness, a fundamental geological destiny. His explosive energy, his desperate craving for freedom, was not an escape from this nature, but its opposite expression, the violent reaction to an immeasurable inertia. He was not a creature of pure chaos. He was the earthquake caused by tectonic plates of fate grinding against each other. The golden circlet she communicated was not merely a celestial chain. It was a focusing lens, designed to channel the immense, raw power of that great stillness, the very power of the earth itself, through his will. But whose will was it meant to serve? The revelation was staggering. His freedom was not a birthright, but a paradox. His very essence was bound to the unyielding nature of stone. To be free, was he meant to break away from what he was or to master it? As he communed with the mountain's heart, Lin watched, her suspicion warring with a dawning sense of awe. She had expected him to smash his way to a solution, but instead, he stood in silent communion, his wild energy for once focused and still. The blight pulsed, a wave of corruption spreading from the jade heart, and one of the smaller floating islands groaned, a deep, cracking sound echoing through the mists as it began to crumble, threatening to fall into the abyss below. The mountain was breaking apart. The crisis had arrived. The groaning of the dying mountain was a physical torment. The spirit weavers swirled in a panic, their faint light dimming as their home disintegrated. Lin drew her sword, its silvery gleam cutting through the gloom. "We must act," she yelled over the grinding of rock. "What is the solution?" Wukong, pulling his consciousness back from the depths of Jade's mind, felt the answer surge through him. It came not from his own thoughts, but from the golden circlet on his brow, which had begun to glow with a faint cold light. The prophecy, his preordained purpose, was making itself known. The celestial mandate was as simple as it was brutal. The blight was a cancer in the mountain's heart. The cure was excision. He was to channel the power of the great stillness through the circlet, not to heal, but to destroy. He was to shatter the jade heart, purging the corruption in a single cataclysmic blast of primordial energy. The cloud-sea peaks would be saved from the blight's spread, the cosmic balance restored. But the mountain itself, along with jade and all the spirit weavers, would be annihilated. A necessary sacrifice. Minister Kao's voice echoed in his memory. He saw the path laid out before him, the path of the champion, the tool of heaven. It was efficient, absolute, and utterly devoid of mercy. He looked at Lin. Her face was grim, ready to accept the harsh reality of their duty. He looked at the flickering spirit weavers, innocent beings caught in a war they could not comprehend. He felt the silent, trusting sorrow of Jade, the ancient consciousness that had shown him the truth of his own soul. And he remembered his first day on Flower Fruit Mountain, the taste of the wind, the sheer unthinking joy of being alive. This was what the heavens demanded he extinguish. The circlet pulsed, urging him on. Obey, fulfill your purpose, be the weapon you were created to be. He raised his hands, gathering power. A deep terrestrial energy flowed into him, making the air crackle. The golden band on his forehead burned brighter, a star of cold fire. Lin tensed, bracing for the inevitable destruction, a look of grim resolve on her face. This was the harsh calculus of order. But as the power peaked, Wukong did not unleash it upon the jade heart. Instead, he turned it inward, focusing it entirely on the circlet itself. He did not try to break it. He knew he could not. Instead, he would rewrite its purpose. He poured his own will into the celestial artifact. A will forged not of prophecy, but of the memory of freedom, of empathy for the small, frightened spirits, of defiance against a fate he never chose. No! The word was not spoken, but roared from the depths of his soul, a shockwave of pure volition. He would not be a tool. He would be a king, and a king protects his subjects. The circlet resisted. Celestial law fought against mortal will. The pain was excruciating, a feeling of being torn apart from the inside out. Golden light erupted from his eyes and mouth. He screamed, a long, tearing sound of agony and rebellion that was not the bark of an animal, but the cry of a god being born. He pushed his own desire, his own choice, his own unwritten oath to protect the weak into the golden matrix of the circlet, overwriting the celestial script, syllable by syllable. The cavern filled with a blinding light, and then, with a sound like a cracked bell tolling the end of an age, there was silence. The light faded slowly like a dying ember. The grinding of the mountain had ceased. Wukong stood trembling, his fur matted with sweat, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The cavern was silent, but it was the silence of peace, not death. The black veins of the blight on the jade heart had not vanished, but they had stopped spreading. They were receding, soothed and contained not by destructive force, but by the resonance of his defiant will. The spirit weavers, no longer panicking, gathered around him, their gentle chimes a hesitant song of gratitude. The floating island outside had stabilized, its fall arrested. Lin stared, her sword held loosely at her side. She had witnessed something impossible. He had not followed destiny. He had wrestled it to a standstill and forced it to bend. She saw not the chaotic monster she had feared, but a sovereign who had chosen his own burden. Slowly, respectfully, she sheathed her blade. Wukong raised a hand to his head. The circlet was still there, but it was changed. The brilliant, burnished gold had been cooked to a dull, metallic gray, the color of common stone. It was no longer a separate object, but seemed fused to his brow, a permanent, indelible scar. When he reached for the celestial power it once commanded, he found nothing. The connection to the heavens was severed, but in its place was something else, a deep, resonant hum that was entirely his own. The circlet no longer sang with the voice of fate. It echoed with the strength of his choice. He had not destroyed his cage. He had transformed it into a crown. A familiar presence rustled at the cavern's entrance. Master Tien stood there, his ancient eyes holding not skepticism, but a deep, knowing sorrow. He had observed the entire event from afar, not through sight, but by reading the shudder in the world's spiritual tapestry. "The heavens are silent," the sage said, his voice quiet. "You have refused their mandate. They will not aid you again. You are alone." Wukong met his gaze. He felt the truth of the words. He had lost his divine purpose, his pre-written glory, but he had gained something far more precious. He walked to a pool of clear water that had gathered on the cavern floor and looked at his reflection. He saw the star-bright eyes, the golden fur, and the grey band of metal across his brow, a mark of his disobedience. He thought of the question that had haunted him since his birth. Was freedom the absence of chains, the boundless joy he felt on that first day, or was it something else? He knew the answer now. He was born with the instinct for freedom, a wild, untamed energy. But true freedom, the freedom to define one's own soul, was not a gift. It had to be seized, forged in a moment of impossible choice. It wasn't about being unbound. It was about choosing your own bonds. His bond was no longer to a distant, cold heaven, but to the fragile, beautiful world below. It was a heavier burden than any prophecy, a steeper path than any mountain. But it was his. He turned from his reflection and walked out of the cavern, into the cleansing mists of the Cloudsea Peaks. The wind whipped through his fur, and for the first time since that first day, it felt truly, completely his own. Sun Wukong, the stone-born Monkey King, was no longer a champion of fate. He was the master of his own story, a king by his own decree, forever bearing the price and the glory of his choice.